My mother-in-law Sable Voss kept a bowl of butterscotch candies on the hall table of her house, and every time I visited before the wedding, she pressed one into my palm like she was handing down something sacred. I never thought much of it. I was 26. I thought a woman who remembered how you liked your coffee was a woman who loved you. I found out the candies were the warmest thing about her. This was Asheville, North Carolina, 8 years ago. I just finished my accounting certification. I still believed you could earn your way into a family by being useful enough. Now, let me back up further because none of this makes sense without my grandmother. Vivian Calloway kept books for 3 grocery stores in Buncombe County for 41 years, and she raised me most weekends after my parents split. She had a brass fountain pen with her initials worn smooth on the cap, and she wrote everything down. Grocery lists, grudges, the exact date a neighbor borrowed a ladder and didn't return it. Write it down, she told me. Not because people lie. Because people forget, and forgetting is how they get away with it. She died the spring before I met Stellan. She left me the pen in a cigar box. Along with 11 years of household ledgers, I never had the heart to throw away. Stellan Voss was easy to love in the specific way that surprises you later. He remembered my coffee order without being told. He drove 2 hours to sit with me the week after the funeral and didn't say a word the whole time, just sat. Sable was harder to read but not unkind. Not at first. She hired me actually before I was anything to her son. Voss Holdings needed someone to clean up a set of vendor accounts nobody wanted to touch, and she looked at my resume and said, "This one keeps records like she's expecting to be doubted someday." I liked her for saying that. I thought she understood something about me nobody else had bothered to notice. I married her son 14 months later in her garden, under a dogwood tree that dropped petals on the folding chairs. I didn't know yet what the candy dish was covering for. I found out the following spring, and it took me most of that year to stop believing it had been an accident. What I didn't understand yet was how carefully Sable had built the version of me she needed. The first sign came in October, 4 months into the marriage. I was reviewing a shipment invoice for a Voss Holdings warehouse project. A routine reconciliation, nothing that should have mattered. When Sable came into the office and read over my shoulder without asking, "You don't need to double-check Selim's numbers," she said. "He's been with this company 18 years. I closed the file. I told myself she was protecting a man she trusted, not correcting me. That's what I told myself. The second sign came at Thanksgiving. Stellan's cousin asked what I did for work, and before I could answer, Sable said, "She keeps our books tidy," in the voice you'd use for a hobby. I laughed along with the table. I have always been good at laughing along. The third sign was smaller than the others, which is exactly why it stayed with me longer. I mentioned once that I wanted to keep my own accounts separate from the family trust, just for clarity's sake. Sable smiled and said, "Of course, dear." And then Stellan's name was added as the sole signer on both accounts within the week. I found out from a bank statement, not from either of them. I know what it looks like now, writing it down. I knew what it looked like then too, if I'm honest. But you don't leave a family over a candy dish and a signature line. You tell yourself you're the kind of woman who doesn't overreact. You know that feeling when you've been patient so long that patience itself starts to feel like a mistake. I didn't have a name for it yet. I just had a folder in my desk drawer where I kept the bank statement, and the invoice and a note in my own handwriting. Just in case. My sister Sidera called that December to tell me Sable had asked her, very casually, what my family was like growing up. Whether we'd ever had money problems. Whether my father had ever been in trouble with the law. He wasn't, I told her. Why is she asking? I don't know, Sidera said. But I told her some things. I didn't think it was a big deal. I didn't think much of that either. Not yet. By January, things had started to feel steadier again. Stellan surprised me with a weekend trip to the coast. Just the two of us, no Sable, no office. He held my hand the whole drive down and told me he wanted to build something separate from his mother's company eventually. Something that was ours. I let myself believe him completely. I didn't know yet that the ground I was standing on had already started to shift beneath me, or that by spring I'd be signing away everything I thought I'd earned, in a room with no one on my side. What happened next is the part one still find hardest to explain because for 4 months nothing was wrong at all. Sable started calling me before board meetings to ask my opinion. She asked me to sit in on a vendor negotiation with a construction firm out of Charlotte, and afterward she told Stellan in front of me that I had a sharper eye for numbers than half the men on the accounting floor. I remember exactly where I was standing when she said it, by the window in the 14th floor conference room, with the Blue Ridge Mountains gray and soft in the distance. I let my guard down. I want to be honest about that because it matters for what came later. I stopped keeping the folder as carefully. I stopped writing things down the way my grandmother taught me to. Stellan and I found a house that spring. A white 2-story on Marymount Avenue with a wraparound porch, and a kitchen that got real morning light. We picked out paint colors. He came home one Tuesday with a boxwood folding ruler he'd found at an estate sale, the kind carpenters used before tape measures, and he said, for our first renovation project, like it was a promise about the future rather than an object. I kept that ruler on the windowsill of my home office. I didn't think about it as anything more than a nice gift for a long time. Sable invited me to her garden club luncheon in April, the first time she'd ever included me in something that wasn't strictly business or family obligation. She introduced me to her friends as my daughter-in-law, the accountant, with something that sounded at the time like pride. I did what I was raised to do. I kept it in the family. I didn't air anything out. I handled the small doubts quietly, the way you handle a splinter you're mostly sure will work itself out. There was one afternoon in early May I still think about. Sable and I were alone in her kitchen, and she was teaching me her mother's recipe for a pound cake, measuring flour by hand instead of by cup because that's how she'd learned it. She talked about Stellan as a boy, how he used to hide under the dining table during thunderstorms, how he cried at his father's funeral in a way he'd never let anyone see him cry since. I love that boy more than my own life, she told me. I need you to understand that whatever else you think of me. I believed her. I still believe that part was true. It's the reason what came next cut as deep as it did. Because a woman who is only ever cruel is easy to walk away from. It's the ones who are sometimes genuinely warm that keep you standing in the doorway a year too long. By the end of May, I had given her every benefit of the doubt I had left to give. I didn't see what was coming. I want to be clear that I didn't see it, not because I wasn't paying attention, but because I had finally, after months of caution, stopped looking for it. What I found out next took me 3 days to fully understand, and about 3 months to stop replaying. It started with something ordinary. I was working from the home office on a Thursday afternoon in June, reconciling the same warehouse account I'd flagged the previous October, the one Sable had told me not to double-check. 18 months of shipment invoices from Selim Draper's division, cross-referenced against delivery logs from a supplier out of Knoxville. The numbers didn't reconcile. Not by a little. By enough that it wasn't a rounding error or a clerical slip. $41,000 in invoice shipments that had no matching delivery record anywhere in the system. I told myself there was an explanation. I have always tried to find the explanation first. I pulled the physical files from the storage cabinet in the office, the ones that predated the digital system, looking for a delivery slip that might reconcile what the computer couldn't. That's when I found the envelope. It was tucked behind the hanging folders in the back of the bottom drawer. Cream-colored, unsealed, no name on the front. It had clearly been there a while. The edges were soft, slightly curled from humidity. I almost didn't open it. I told myself it was probably nothing, an old tax document, something forgotten. I opened it. Inside were 7 canceled checks, each one made out to a shell company called Ridgeline Logistics Group, each one signed by Selim Draper, each one dated within a week of an invoice I just flagged as unreconciled. Behind the checks was a single handwritten note in Sable's handwriting. See, keep this quiet until after the Marymount closing. S. I sat down on the floor of my own office, right there on the carpet. I didn't cry. I read the note 4 more times like it might change if I looked at it long enough. The Marymount closing. Our house. She had known about this, whatever this was, before we'd even signed for the house on Marymount Avenue, and she had asked someone to wait. I photographed every page with my phone before I did anything else. Then I made copies at the library 2 miles away, because some part of me, the part my grandmother built, already knew better than to keep the only proof in a drawer that wasn't mine. I didn't tell Stellan that night. I sat across from him at dinner and asked about his day and listened to him talk about a client meeting. And the whole time there was a folded copy of that note in my coat pocket, and I said nothing. I want to be honest that this wasn't dignity. Not yet. It was fear, and it was the specific cold clarity of someone deciding they needed more information before they said a single word out loud. I thought about my grandmother's brass pen, sitting in the cigar box in my closet. Write it down, she used to say. Not because people lie. Because people forget, and forgetting is how they get away with it. I didn't think Sable had forgotten anything. I think she'd been counting on me never looking in that drawer at all. This is where things started to move faster than I expected, and slower than I wanted, both at once. I called a lawyer 3 days after I found the envelope. Her name was Bronwyn Hale, recommended by a coworker who'd used her for a business dispute the year before. She had a small office above a bakery on Wall Street downtown, and a way of listening that didn't perform sympathy. She just listened and wrote things down and let silences sit exactly as long as they needed to. I laid it all out in order. The unreconciled invoices. The canceled checks to Ridgeline Logistics. The note in Sable's handwriting about the Merrimon closing. I'd organized everything into a binder the way I organize a year-end audit, tabbed and dated, because that was the only way I knew how to hand someone my life and have it make sense. Bronwyn read the chart I'd built, studied each check and set her pen down. This is $41,000 in traceable fraud at minimum, she said. And this note puts your mother-in-law's knowledge on the record before your closing date. That's not nothing. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means you have 3 options and I want to walk through all 3 before you decide anything. She held up a finger. You can report this internally to the Voss Holdings board and let them handle Draper through corporate channels. 2, you can take this to the district attorney's economic crimes unit, which opens a criminal process you can't control the timeline of. 3, you protect yourself financially. First, separate accounts, updated estate documents, a paper trail showing when you knew what, and you decide the rest once you're not standing on ground someone else can pull out from under you. She didn't tell me what to do. She told me the risks of each path plainly, the way you'd expect from someone who understood that a wrong decision made from panic was worse than a slow decision made from clarity. I want option 3 first, I said. I want to be steady before I do anything else. Good, she said. That's the answer of someone who's going to come out of this fine. I left her office with a list of 11 things to do before I said a single word to anyone in the Voss family. Open my own accounts. Request certified copies of the trust documents. Photograph every ledger I had access to before access could be revoked. Document my own financial history in case anyone tried to rewrite it later, the way I'd started to suspect they might. There is a difference between being patient and being a placeholder. I didn't understand that difference the year I got married. I was starting to understand it now. Sitting in my car outside a bakery on Wall Street with a legal pad full of instructions. That week, I got the courage to ask my sister Sidera what exactly she'd told Sable back in December. About our father, about money. She asked if he'd ever taken anything that wasn't his, Sidera said, her voice careful. I told her about the missing deposit at the hardware store from years ago. The thing that got resolved. I didn't think she'd use it for anything. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that Sable had been building a story about my family for months before I ever found that drawer. A story that would make me easy to discredit if it ever came to that. I kept the folder in a safe deposit box after that. Not the drawer at home. Not anywhere Sable had ever set foot. I decided not to confront anyone yet, and that decision cost me something every single day I kept it. 3 weeks after I met with Bronwyn, Stellan came home from a board meeting and told me, almost in passing, that his mother wanted to accelerate the closing on the Merrimon house. Move it up by 6 weeks, before the end of the fiscal quarter. Why the rush? I asked. Tax reasons, he said. You know how she is about timing things. I knew exactly how she was about timing things now. I said nothing except that it sounded fine. That was the hardest part of those weeks. Not the fear, not even the anger. But the ordinary dinners where I sat across from a man I still loved and said nothing about the note sitting in a safe deposit box 11 minutes from our kitchen table. I was raised to be polite. Nobody taught me what to do when politeness meant protecting the people who were lying to me. I kept documenting. I requested my own certified copy of the household trust from the county recorder's office, using my maiden name and a P.O. box, so there'd be no record of the request reaching Sable before I wanted it to. I photographed 6 more months of warehouse invoices, cross-referencing every payment to Ridgeline Logistics I could find. There were 11 in total by the time I stopped counting. 11 checks, 11 months, over $90,000 that had never once shown up as an actual delivery. I found something else too, going through older files I hadn't touched since before the wedding. A life insurance policy, taken out on Stellan the year we got married, with Sable listed as a contingent beneficiary behind me at a percentage that had quietly increased twice since the ceremony. I didn't know yet what that meant. I only knew it was one more thing that had been changed without my knowledge, and I added it to the folder. Bronwyn called me in for a second meeting in late July. She'd had a forensic accountant she trusted review my documentation. "This is clean work," she said. "Whoever taught you to keep records like this did you a favor." "My grandmother," I said. "She used to say, write it down. Because people forget, and forgetting is how they get away with it." Bronwyn nodded slowly. She wasn't wrong. I asked her the question I'd been carrying for weeks. If I go forward with this, the board or the district attorney, whichever path, what happens to my marriage? She was quiet for a moment. "I can't answer that," she said. "I can tell you what happens to the fraud. What happens to your marriage depends on what your husband does when he finds out what his mother's been hiding, and whether he was ever part of it. That's not a legal question. That's a question only time can answer." I drove home that evening past the house on Marymount Avenue, the one with the wraparound porch, still empty, still waiting for a closing date Sable wanted moved up by 6 weeks. I sat in my car outside it for a long time. I thought about the boxwood ruler on my windowsill, the one Stellan gave me for a renovation project neither of us had started yet. I thought about the promise a small gift like that was supposed to hold. I did not know, driving home that night, that within 2 weeks I would be standing in a boardroom on the 14th floor, holding that same ruler in my coat pocket like it was the only steady thing I had left, while a woman who had once pressed butterscotch candy into my palm looked at me like I was something she needed to get rid of quickly and quietly. This is the part I've told the fewest people because it happened fast, and because I never raised my voice once, not even at the end. I requested a meeting with the full Voss Holdings board for the second week of August. I didn't tell Stellan what it was about. I told him only that it concerned the warehouse division, and that I needed him there. I dressed the way I dress for any audit presentation. Nothing dramatic. A gray blazer, my hair back, the boxwood ruler in my coat pocket. Not because I needed it, but because some part of me wanted to be holding something solid. Sable was already seated at the head of the table when I walked in, the way she always was, early enough to own the room before anyone else arrived. She smiled at me the way she always did. I didn't smile back. I sat down across from her and opened my binder. "I want to walk the board through a reconciliation issue in the warehouse division," I said. My voice was even. Stayed even the entire time. I laid out the invoices first. 11 months, $91,000 in payments to a company called Ridgeline Logistics, with no corresponding delivery records anywhere in the system. I passed copies to each board member. Selim Draper, sitting 3 seats down, went very still. Then I placed the canceled checks on the table, each one signed by Selim, each one dated within days of an invoice. Finally I set down the note. Sable's handwriting. "Keep this quiet until after the Marymount closing." The room was quiet in a way I will remember for the rest of my life. Sable's face didn't change right away. That was the thing about her I'd underestimated the whole time I'd known her. She didn't crumble the way I'd imagined. She simply looked at the note and then at me and said very evenly, "Where did you get that?" "From the drawer you asked me not to look in," I said. Selim Draper stood up first. He said something about needing to step out to call his attorney, and nobody stopped him. Stellan hadn't said a word. I looked at him once, and what I saw on his face wasn't anger at me. It was the particular look of someone doing arithmetic he never wanted to do, adding up months of small things that suddenly reconciled into one large one. "Mother," he said quietly, "is this true?" Sable didn't answer him directly. She looked at me instead. "You could have come to me," she said. "Family handles things privately." I took the boxwood ruler out of my coat pocket. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just held it the way you hold something to remember what it's supposed to mean. "You gave my husband this ruler and told him it was for the house on Marymount Avenue," I said. "The same house you were trying to close before anyone noticed $91,000 was missing." "I don't think you were ever protecting family, Sable. I think you were protecting timing." She didn't have an answer for that. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have an answer for anything. The board voted to place Selim Draper on immediate administrative leave pending a full audit. Within 6 weeks, the County District Attorney's Economic Crimes Unit opened a formal investigation into Ridgeline Logistics, based largely on the documentation Bronwyn Hale and I had already assembled. Selim was indicted in October on charges of embezzlement and falsifying business records. Sable was never charged criminally. The note proved knowledge, Bronwyn told me, but not direction. But the board removed her from any operational role in the company by the end of that year. I never gloated. I want to be clear about that because there were moments I could have. I didn't raise my voice, not once, not even when Sable tried to tell the board a version of events where I was the one who couldn't be trusted. The truth didn't need me to shout. It just needed me to stay calm enough to keep it. Stellan filed for divorce 4 months later. Not because of anything I'd done. Because, he told me, he couldn't stay married to the version of his life his mother had built around him without knowing what else in it might not be real. I understood that better than he probably expected me to. It's been 2 years since that boardroom, and I want to tell you the parts that don't fit neatly into a story about justice. I kept the house on Marymount Avenue. That surprised people. Stellan didn't fight me on it, and the settlement, reached quietly through Bronwyn without a courtroom, put my name on the deed outright, along with a restitution amount tied directly to the $91,000 the fraud had cost the company, which the board agreed I was owed given how much of the recovery had depended on my documentation. I finished the renovation. The boxwood ruler still sits on the windowsill of what's now just my office. I use it sometimes actually when I'm hanging shelves. It turned out to be a genuinely good ruler. I've stopped needing it to mean anything more than that. Selim Draper pled guilty that spring and is serving a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony that helped the state trace the full scope of what he'd been doing, which turned out to be larger than even I had found, closer to $300,000 across 2 other divisions I'd never had access to. Sable called me once about a year after everything came apart. I almost didn't answer. When I did, she didn't apologize, not really. She said she wanted me to know that whatever I thought of her, she had believed at the time that she was protecting her son. "You were protecting yourself," I told her. "I've made my peace with that being true. I don't need you to see it the same way I do." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I didn't expect. "He talks about you like the divorce was a loss and not a relief. I thought you should know that." I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't entirely. I filed it away the way I've learned to file most things. My sister Sidera and I talk more now than we did that year. She apologized eventually for what she'd told Sable without thinking it through. I told her what I'd learned the hard way, that the people who ask careful questions about your past are rarely asking out of simple curiosity. Bronwyn Hale still handles my legal work. I keep my files in the same tab dated order I learned from my grandmother, and I catch myself sometimes explaining a filing system to someone the exact way she once explained it to me. Write it down, I tell them. Not because people lie. Because people forget, and forgetting is how they get away with it. I started a small scholarship at the community college here in Asheville last spring, in my grandmother's name, the Vivian Calloway Fund, for adult students studying accounting or bookkeeping later in life than most people expect to start. The first recipient was a woman in her 40s going back to school after a divorce of her own. I didn't tell her why the fund existed. Some things you carry forward quietly, and let the shape speak for itself. I think about that candy dish sometimes, the one in Sable's front hallway, and how I used to think it meant something simple. I understand now that the people who seem the warmest aren't always the safest, and that the ones who earn your trust slowly are sometimes the ones counting on how long it takes you to look in the drawer. I don't carry anger about it anymore. Not most days. What I carry instead is something steadier. The knowledge that I built my way back to solid ground using nothing but what I already had. A pen. A ledger. A habit of writing things down that somebody taught me before I understood why it would matter. If you've ever had a quiet feeling that something in your family wasn't what it looked like, and you waited far longer than you should have to trust that feeling, tell me about it. I'd like to know I'm not the only one who learned this lesson the slow way.